Yesterday, we worked on beginning a game in GDevelop 5 from the very beginning, from the ground up. And we're going to open up that project that we were working on. It was called Demo 1. And this is where we left off. We just have a tiled sprite at the bottom, and that's pretty much it. So we're going to add some more stuff to it today, but it's going to be really basic. We're going to keep along with the same strategy of avoiding using custom behaviors and things like that as much as possible so that we can learn how the game engine works. Now, one thing I didn't show you yesterday is that there is a grid. So yesterday I just moved this over and tried to position it by hand. But if I wanted to, I could actually turn on a grid. I could say show grid. The only problem is if you look, the grid is not actually lined up with the bottom edge of my screen because it turns out that 600 pixels is not divisible by the grid size. So if I wanted to adjust that though, I can click here and say setup grid, and then I could go and offset the Y value until it lined up the way I wanted it to. So say 24, I just happen to know that's what it's going to be. And now you can see that the grid lines up right at the bottom edge there. And when the grid is visible, things snap to the grid. Okay. So now that I have that positioned, then I can go and scale it so that it snaps right to the edge. And now it's perfectly positioned, perfectly scaled, and ready to go. So we're going to add another object. But before we do that, I want to show you a resource that can help you create sprites. It's a awesome website, opengameart.org, and there are other websites out there, but this one I think it's been around a long time, and there's just a lot on here. We're gonna browse for some 2D art since we're making a 2D game, and I'm gonna just look for a bear, and you can see I've searched for it before, but there's some other things I'm going to make sure that I check off. For instance, I'm going to choose CC0. That means things that are no attribution required, things in the public domain or things shared free, and nobody expects you to give attribution in your game. Not that you can't use other things, but if you use other things, you're going to have to credit the original author. So I'm going to hit search, and you can see that's a nice bear right there, and I've actually downloaded it before, so you'll see it. But I'm going to click here and we're going to download that. And it's important that you actually download it into your project folder. So I've gone to my GDevelop projects, into the current project. I'm going to save it right here as bear.png. I can either type the name in here, but since I already had it, I'm just going to click on it. And then we'll save it. And now it's saved into my project folder. So you need resources to be saved into your project folder. So we can add our new object now. This will be a regular sprite though, because it's not going to be tiled. This is going to be a single object, and we want, as I scale it, I want it to actually scale the size of the sprite. So I'll choose sprite. Make sure you give it a good name. So this will be our player object in this case. So I'll just call it player. And now I can add an animation. I'm going to add and go choose the picture that represents this object. So here's the sprite that we're going to use, the animation for this sprite. I'm going to open that, and you could edit the hitbox. That's for a later discussion though. We won't do that now. And we're going to hit apply. So now I have another object. I can drag it in, and you can see right away this is very large compared to what I really wanted it to be. I could either go edit the original picture, or I can scale the object down. Now notice that if I just scale, it gets all squishy. So I'm going to hold the Shift key, and that way I can force it to have the same aspect ratio as what it had at the beginning. Now I'm going to move this someplace, and just um, just to keep things simple, I'm not going to use any behaviors. I'm not going to add a physics engine or anything like that. I'm just going to keep things really simple. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this character have the ability to move. And we're going to do it in a very primitive, simple way. So to do that, I need to add some events. And I'm going to go to level 1 events up here, click that tab. It says there are no events here. So we need to add some. We're just going to add an empty event for now. And notice that I get a blank line up here. It says add a condition and add an action. And the condition in my case will be moving the character. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm probably going to use keys. So let's add a condition. There's the keyboard. And if a key gets pressed, and then I need to choose which key I'm going to press. So maybe if I press the A key, well, I'd probably move to the left. So A, if the A key is pressed, I'd want to move to the left. To move to the left, I'm going to add an action. So in this case, I'm working with an object, so I'm going to go to Common Actions for Objects. I could go to Movement, but the simpler thing to do is just to change the position of the character. So if I go to the position of the object, I'm going to move it. Let's see, if I'm pressing A, that means I'm going left, left and right, left. So that's changing the X coordinate. And I'm going to choose the player. I'm going to, well, if I'm going to the left, I'm actually making my X coordinate smaller. So I'm going to subtract a number. And let's just subtract, let's say 2 for now. Later on, we can add a variable to set the speed, but for now, we'll just use a number. So if I say OK, now I should have the ability to move to the left, but only to the left. So if I play my game, hold the A key down, you can see that as I'm holding the A key down, the character is changing. It's moving to the left. So we're going to do the same thing now for the right. And the easiest way to do that is to copy this event. So if I right click and say copy, then I can do Control V for paste or edit paste. And instead of subtracting 2 to go to the left or to the right, I'm going to add 2. So notice that I could click there and then change the setting, but I also need to change the key. So instead of A, I'll use D. And now when I press D, they'll move to the right. But I also want to be able to go up, I want the ability to move up and down. So I'm going to add a couple more events. And similar idea, we'll go to the keyboard. If the key is pressed, and this time I'll press W for up. Now, one thing that's a little weird for people when they're first learning to program in an engine is they don't understand the coordinate system. And on a screen, as you go up, your Y value actually decreases, which is a little backwards from what you do in other things. And that has to do with the history of screens and how they were originally developed. So the original cathode ray tube screens started scanning in the upper left. And so positions were based on that. So we're going to add another action. Now to save myself a little time, I could just copy, but this is for the X position. So I'm just going to add an action and I'm going to go to position. We're going to change the Y position this time for our player. We're going to, let's see, going up means the Y value is getting smaller. So I'm going to subtract a number and then OK. And then I can copy this one and paste it, change the key. See, S would be down. Oops, S. And we're going to go down this time. So we'll add the opposite of what we did last time. Now I should have the ability to move in every direction. And sure enough, and notice if I hold down 2 keys at once, I go diagonally. Now this is actually something that you'd want to fix in an actual game because it turns out that you're moving almost 1.5 times the speed when you go diagonally, and that's not realistic for a game. So in a real game, you would need to adjust for that. So now that we have the ability to move, we probably want something to happen in the game. And probably the easiest thing to do for now is to set it up so that the player has a little bit of health. And to do that, I'm going to go back to the scene and I'm going to go to the player and we're going to edit the object variables this time. So instead of edit object variables. And I'm going to add a variable for just this object. And this object is going to have a health variable. And I'll apply that. So now my player has a variable called health. And right now, though, its health is 0 because that's the default number for a variable. We should probably change that. So I'm going to go to my level 1 events and I'm going to add a new empty event. I'm going to drag this one up to the top though, because this is actually something that happens at the very beginning of the game. And what I'm going to do is go find the scene. And when the scene, at the beginning of the scene, I'm going to do something. Notice there's nothing to configure here. It's just when the scene begins, that's the condition. And at the beginning of the scene, I'm going to change the health of my player. So I'm going to add an action. And the temptation is to go to this variables thing here, but notice this is for global variables. That means variables that belong to the entire game. And we didn't create a global variable. We created a variable for the player itself. So I'm going to go to the common actions for objects, and I'll find the variables. And now I'm going to modify the variable for my object. The object then I'm modifying the variable for is the player, and I'm going to set that health to be 100. Now I also need to choose the variable that I want to change. So in this case, it's the player's health. And I'm going to set it to 100. So we'll pretend it's percentage. And then I say OK. And now my health has 100, or it's been set to 100. So my player has a health, it's been set to 100, but there's really no way to know that the player has health. I should probably be able to display that someplace. I could do that using text, but I think it's actually better to do that using a health bar. So let's go to level 1 here. We're going to add a new object, and we're going to create a sprite. I'll call this my health bar, and I'm going to add an animation. And this time I'll just make a very basic animation. And I can set the size to whatever I want, but I'm going to set it to 16 by 16 because it doesn't need to be very big. And then I'm going to choose the color for my health bar, and I'll fill that in. Don't forget to name your sprites before you save. It's a lot easier now than later. So we'll call this the health bar sprite and save that. And now that's the health bar, so apply that. And I'm going to drag that into my scene. And I don't want it to be this big, so we'll drop it down a little bit. Notice that I can change the size over here as well. So if you remember, the sprite was actually 16 by 16, which there's the size that I made. So we're going to take our health bar and we're going to change the size of the health bar based on the health of the player. Right now, notice it's really small. And I don't want it that way when the health is 100. So at the beginning of the game, I'm going to change the size of the health bar. So I'm going to add an action. I'm going to go to common actions for objects. But notice that even though it's an object, what I'm trying to change is not here because what I'm really trying to change is the size of the object. And that's actually a visual thing. So if I go to the next category down here called Sprite, sprites are the visual representation of an object. And if you look, there's size. So if I click on size, I'm going to change the width. I don't need to change both dimensions. I'm only going to change the width. I'm going to change the width of the health bar, and I'm going to set it equal to something. Now I could put in a number here, but now's the perfect time to talk about how we're going to be setting the width of this health bar based on the health of the player. So I could, if I understood the code behind this, I could just type it out. I know that I'm trying to change the width of the health bar to be based on the player's health. If I type player and hit dot, I can actually ask it for a variable from the player. And I know that the name of the variable that we created for the player was called health. And then I could say, okay, I want the width of my health bar to be exactly what the health is. But if I don't remember all of that, I can come over here to this button. I can say, hey, I want to go grab the variable from a player or from an object. Choose the object that you want to get the variable from, find the name of the variable, and apply that. And notice that it puts it in there for me. Now, if I want to have the health bar wider, I can just multiply by a number. So like in this case, maybe I'm going to multiply the health by 2. That means that when the health is 100, the width of the health bar would be 200. So we're going to hit OK now. We're going to play the game. And even though in the scene, the health bar only looks like that, when we start the game, it should be a lot wider. So let's hit play and notice our health bar is 200 pixels wide because we've set the width to that. So that is a basic example of how to get movement working, very basic movement, no physics involved, and also to set up a basic health bar so that you can display information on the screen. But in our next video, we'll actually talk about how we deal with collisions and when things are colliding, what's going to happen to the health, and how are we going to make sure that health bar reflects the difference in health. See you next time.